Everyone, welcome to a video about Nioh by Team Ninja. One of my favorite games of the past 3 or 4 years. One that I have played many hours worth. I think I've cleared the game 3 times now, which is a lot for me with modern games. You know, I don't really have the patience unless they're really hitting a spot for me, and so Nioh definitely did that. And I kind of want to explain not only why this game is great and why I like it so much, but I also want to bring a new perspective that I don't think a lot of people have really talked much about, or the people who have talked about it really haven't had a whole lot of, exposure or anything like that. And so what I want to bring up is I think Nioh is a little bit misunderstood because most of the people I've read, most of the reviews, or most people who talk about this game, or I've talked to about this game, kind of just view it as a well-done Dark Souls clone with improved combat. That's kind of the opinion a lot of people have, is, oh, it's Dark Souls in feudal Japan, which there is a game like that now, with improved combat, or different combat. I don't know if everyone even thinks it's improved or not. But I think there's more going on with the history of this game beyond just straight-up copying Dark Souls. And so what I want to start off with is actually talking about Team Ninja themselves and kind of explain my perspective of what I think is going on. Because there's some interesting ironies or connections anyway. And so Team Ninja are famous for their Ninja Gaiden reboot series. Rightfully so. That's my favorite 3D series of all time. And Ninja Gaiden 2 is probably my favorite 3D game of all time. I have a video about that hopefully some people check out. But anyway, so coming into Nioh, I think I'm one of the few people who have put much more time and energy into the Ninja Gaiden side of things rather than the Dark Souls sides of things, whereas I think most reviewers or most players in general are more likely to have played Dark Souls than Ninja Gaiden, which is kind of crazy, but I think that's definitely true. Especially with how popular this series has become over the years, Dark Souls that is. However, I think Nioh is doing a lot more than just copying Dark Souls. And so the history of coming into Nioh is that it was actually in development for a very long time. I can't remember the exacts, but I do remember that originally it was supposed to come out on the PS3, and I think, if I remember correctly, it was going to be more like a Dynasty Warrior style game, or the demos kind of look like that, or whatever, the trailers. And so I can't remember how long it's been in development, but many years, and it morphed over the years. And I think what happened is, in case people aren't aware, between Ninja Gaiden 2 and Ninja Gaiden 3, the original director for those games, I can't remember his name, or, my Japanese isn't that good, he ended up leaving for whatever reason. I can't remember why, but he leaves, and so when they come out with Ninja Gaiden 3, it's a bit of a step back. Well, not a bit, it is a huge step back, and then they try and fix it a bit in Razor's Edge. However, I don't think, some people have kind of compared it to kind of like Kojima leaving Konami and all that sort of thing, and now they can't make a good Metal Gear. I don't think that's the case. I think Team Ninja themselves can still pull out awesome games without this guy. It's just, when they were making 3, I think they were a little bit lost. But anyway, so Nioh is one of their first projects that I think is an awesome success without that guy. And I think it's a bit of a departure from Ninja Gaiden. It's not Ninja Gaiden 4, but it's got a lot in common with those games that a lot of people, unless you play a lot of Ninja Gaiden, you're not going to pick up on. And so I'm hoping in these videos or in this video, to show what that is exactly, and to kind of point out where it deviates from Dark Souls exactly, and what makes it fun and interesting. However, another thing I definitely want to put out there, because I don't think a lot of people have thought about this, is it's kind of an interesting relationship between Dark Souls and Nioh, because it's obvious that Nioh has been influenced by Dark Souls. I mean, the influence is so obvious that, like I said, some people call it a straight-up clone. However, what isn't as obvious is that, in my opinion, I think it holds up, is that Dark Souls itself was heavily inspired by Ninja Gaiden on the Xbox. If you look at how Ninja Gaiden plays on the Xbox, a lot of those principles that Dark Souls is famous for, you know, the lower enemy count, but the more dangerous enemies, the more dangerous combat, weighty combat, all that sort of things, all those sorts of things originated in Ninja Gaiden, and you can see a lot of parallels between Ninja Gaiden and Dark Souls. So it's kind of a funny relationship where Ninja Gaiden influences Dark Souls, which then influences Nioh, right? So I don't think it's just a straight up, oh, they're jumping on the bandwagon and copying Dark Souls. And the reason why I say that too is that there's a lot of gameplay that is inherited directly from Ninja Gaiden, that you can just go from playing Ninja Gaiden, pick up the controller, start playing Nioh, and start doing some similar stuff. For instance, and you can kind of see the way the combat is designed is much more Ninja Gaiden-like than Dark Souls-like. For instance, I know that Dark Souls, kind of the idea behind Dark Souls, at least when I was first hearing about people talking about it, is that the idea is having like really weighty, heavy combat where every move matters and you have to commit to everything. I think I remember Matthew Matosis's reviews of Dark Souls where he talks about that, how you have to commit to everything. And what's funny is that in the world of 3D action games, Ninja Gaiden is like that in a lot of ways. Unlike Bayonetta or Devil May Cry, you can't interrupt your actions in Ninja Gaiden. So if you swing your sword, you can't interrupt that. However, what you can do is do guard buffering and counters, and you can kind of supplement that though. So it's not as stiff as something like Dark Souls, where you literally are committed. So, for instance, I want to talk about when I play when I play Nioh, I'm not playing this game like a Dark Souls game. I'm playing it like a Ninja Gaiden game. And I wanted to show that this is not only possible, but I think it's extremely effective. Because when I watch people play this game who are mostly Dark Souls players, yeah, you can kind of tell because the way they approach the combat, they're a lot less aggressive. And they're not doing certain techniques that you can actually pull off in this game. So one of the techniques that I want to talk about, I can't really find a name for it, but I call it a guard dash cancel, where if you're guarding and an enemy hits your sword or whatever your weapon you're guarding with, if you dash immediately after they hit you, you can cancel through it. And so you can set yourself up in really favorable positions very quickly. And so if you're really good at, and your movement speed in this game is much faster than Dark Souls, like in Ninja Gaiden. So you can maneuver your way around enemies in this game much more effectively than in Dark Souls. Because I know a lot of what Dark Souls gameplay, at least, you know, the original one, from what I understand, comes down to is strictly defense and counterattacking, or that's mostly what you do. Where in Nioh, you can do that, and there's certain enemies where you need to do that, but there's also certain enemies where if you're doing that, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice, where actually you should be being more aggressive, you should be bullying people. And then also the Kai pull system kind of is again kind of like a support of that style of gameplay, whereas in Dark Souls there's the stamina system of, okay, you gotta play defensive, everything takes up stamina or whatever, your rolls, your hits all take up stamina, your guards all take up stamina, and you just gotta be patient. Where in Nioh, patience is not always the best way to go, because not only do you have stamina, but your enemies have stamina, and you can see that. So you want to see when I fight enemies here. In many cases, like this guy here, it is better, these smaller enemies, to just pile drive through them with the low, rather than trying to do a bunch of hit and countering stuff, because they can grab you. This game has grabs where you can get grabbed. And so it's better just to pile drive your way through them. And then there's other enemies like the bigger ones where you have to switch your stances. And so this game is much more heavily focused on these types of things than I feel Dark Souls is, at least in my experience. And I think the later games are a little more combat intensive, but to really enjoy this game, you got to start thinking about these things. Rather than when I've talked with other people who are mostly Dark Souls players and they're talking about Nioh and all the things they're talking about, I'm like, it's hard for me to kind of connect with it because it's more like RPG stuff. It's like, well, this game has... I can't remember what a lot of the complaints are, but, you know, like limited things you can do as far as weapons and stuff like that, and more talking about like armor and your stats and how your stats work, and it's like, that's way... Of course you can play the game that way, but I also wanted to point out, just for people coming into this game, is you can straight up play this game like it's an action game, which is what I do. I don't play it like an RPG. So when I level, I just straight level down. I just go through and level it like linearly. I don't care about trying to min-max things and all those sorts of things, because if you're good in keeping my weight really light, I think that's another thing too, that it's a style of playing this game. If you want to play this game like an action game, you got to play it like it's Ninja Gaiden, where Ninja Gaiden, like 3 hits can kill you. And so in this game too, if you have a light weight, you can play more aggressively, but you just lose that cushion of, you know, being able to be hit a bunch. But I also feel like the way this game works is, playing heavy, I don't know if it's really that advantageous anyway, because if you get your stamina broken, you're going to get wrecked no matter how much armor you're wearing. So that's why I personally recommend light builds as much as possible. Just keep your armor light and focus on that rather than trying to tank your way through the game. So another aspect of this game that makes it so much more fun to me than Dark Souls style games is the stances, and how you use those stances, and how you can mix and match what you're doing. So I just wanted to give some kind of tips on how to approach this game when it comes to the stances. So your low stance is your speed stance. It's your light, quick hits. Low stance is good for pretty much all smaller enemies, and it's also good for when you're just running around. So you'll notice whenever I'm just running around, I'm in low stance, because your dashes are best in low stance, and you're just fastest, and you can actually get around faster in low stance. And so then you've got high stance and mid stance, and you'll see here high stance is really good against larger enemies that you can hit weak spots. So this game has a cripple system where if you hit certain weak spots on enemies, it'll cripple them, and then you can come in and, you know, hit them with a really heavy killing attack. And so with these guys, if you hit them in the head with a heavy attack, it'll cripple them. And so you use your heavy stance on kind of heavier, larger characters, or on characters who block a lot, which you can get to as well. So that's what's really fun about this game, is that, for instance, in Ninja Gaiden 3, a huge problem with that game's combat system is when you get into the higher level difficulties, all the enemies just guard spam you. They just block everything. They sit around and block and block and block, and there's no guard break system in that game, so you literally have to either resort to low damage throws or bait them to attack you and then counter. But most of the time they're just going to sit around and block, which is really frustrating. In Nioh, however, if you just play a certain style and don't try and adapt tactically, you're going to lose. For instance, there are enemies in this game, especially like the samurais or enemies that wear a lot of armor, who will sit and just guard spam you. They'll just stand around and block everything you do, and then counterattack you. And so if you just play in low or mid stance all the time, you're going to get wrecked by these enemies. However, if you know how to adjust and switch onto heavy stance, you can break their blocks and stun them and kill them. So that's an example of using your stances correctly. However, if you just run around on heavy stance all day, your rolls are slower. It's kind of more like playing Dark Souls, honestly. When you're in heavy stance, it's kind of like traditional Dark Souls, where you have slower movement, slower rolls, heavy, slow hitting attacks. But when you get 3 guys on you, and they're coming at you with swords and axes and shooting you with a freaking arrow like this guy, yeah, high stance isn't going to cut it. You're going to get wrecked. So that's when you need to switch to either mid or low stance. And mid stance is really easily explained as just the all-around stance. It's kind of the default if you don't know exactly what to do against an enemy. Just switch to mid stance. You can't really go wrong. You could beat this entire game in mid stance if you wanted. You just wouldn't be as effective. And I usually use mid stance on bosses. I think it's kind of like the best stance against bosses, because it's just nice and all around. You can get some quick hits in and then, yeah, move on. Another really fun aspect of this game are the weapons and how the weapons work, because the weapons aren't just superficially different from each other. And again, that's why I think when someone was complaining about the weapon selection in the game, they were talking more about just the aesthetics of it, right? Oh, I want lots of different weapons to collect and all those sorts of things, rather than, which isn't what you're looking for in an action game. In an action game, you don't want a bunch of superficially different weapons. What you want is a bunch of different weapons, or a variety of different weapons that are balanced, but are unique. And that's what Nioh offers. And so that's why I feel like when someone was complaining about the weapon selection to me, I was like, hard for me to agree with them, because I felt like it actually has a very diverse weapon selection. I think there's like 8 or 9 different styles of weapons, and they're all very distinct from each other, and they're all really fun to play, honestly. There's not a weapon style I don't like. My favorites kind of fluctuate with my mood. The sword is amazing, of course. That's like the go-to if you don't know what to do. But I don't think the sword's the most powerful. But I think probably the most OP weapon in the game is probably the axe. The axe is very good, and I'm pretty sure you could clear the entire game with the axe no problem, because not only does it have really powerful heavy attacks, but its low stance is actually pretty good too. And so I could see myself beating bosses and stuff with it. The only issue with the axe is the mobility isn't that great with the dashes. So there's the axe. That's one of my favorites. The hammer. So the hammer and the axe, I think, are actually the same weapon type. And then it has the, I don't know what to call it, the ball and sickle. That's in Ninja Gaiden. Again, there's a lot of weapon types that just kind of carry between Ninja Gaiden and Nioh, and they kind of work similarly. And that's a really fun weapon type. I think it's actually pretty damn powerful too. And I've seen some speedruns or just high-level gameplay, and I think that weapon's also kind of broken for what you can do with it. So you notice right there, that's exactly what I was talking about earlier though, where that guy, he just wanted to guard spam me, and he was kind of a lower mid-weight enemy, so you can just totally destroy their guard with your heavy attacks, and then paralyze them and kill them. Where, in Dark Souls, from what I understand, at least from what I've played, you always have to be more cautious, and you're always kind of working your way around the enemies. Because I've tried to play Dark Souls like Nioh or like Ninja Gaiden, and that shit usually does not work out. So here's a good example of when you're getting flanked by multiple enemies. This is when you need to start switching to low stance for some quick hit and run tactics. So another thing that to keep in mind is that again, there's heavy and light attacks. And there's also combos and combinations in this game that are really fun. And the further you get in the game, you can add in like custom things at the end of the combos. Like one of the best ones is you can add in a kick at the end. And that's really good because it basically breaks people's guards pretty effectively. And so in the later stages, you get a lot of enemies that block a lot. And so if you hit them with the heavy attack string and then kick, you can usually break their guards and trip them up pretty easily. There's also some shenanigans you can do in this game with Kai pulsing and guarding. Well, where, for instance, you can actually do something you do in Bayonetta. I can't remember the term for it, but in Bayonetta you can interrupt. Oh, it's called free canceling in Dead or Alive. Maybe that would be a better parallel. So in Dead or Alive and in Virtua Fighter, and I think in Ninja Gaiden, I guess you could do this. You can do something where you attack and then hit the second attack. Okay, I'm gonna try it. You do a string, like heavy, heavy, heavy. And normally like this here, I did heavy, heavy, heavy. You know, I did 3 distinct attacks in a string. Well, you'll notice that with this sword, if you heavy attack, that heavy attack is really good, the first strike. So if you heavy attack, Kai Pulse Guard, heavy attack, Kai Pulse Guard, you can just repeat that first attack rather than doing the whole string. And you can, whop on some enemies much more effectively than in certain scenarios. Like, you can manipulate certain situations with that. Again, I'm not sure if you can pull stuff like this off in Dark Souls as easily, or if it's as useful. But you can work in these kind of more advanced fighting mechanics into this game. And so I just really encourage people who come into Nioh to not just view it as a Dark Souls clone, but to really check out what you can do with the combat system, because it's actually extremely deep and fun. And that's what keeps me coming back to the game over and over. It's not the story or whatever, the open world. It's that there's these stages, and I'm just trying to pile drive my way through these stages in style and with speed. So that's what I think is really fun about this game. And I do like a lot of the way the RPG elements work, because I think it's pretty simple and straightforward, which I appreciate. I'm not an RPG master by any means, so some of the more, like when I was talking and looking for advice in Dark Souls and stuff like that, some of the more complicated aspects of that game go right over my head or aren't really my thing. Where with Nioh, you can straight up just play this game like an action game with some RPG elements. Pretty fun that way, in my opinion. So before we close out the video, I thought maybe I'll walk you through this boss fight here, because the fun thing about Nioh 2 is that the boss fights in this game are just amazing. They're a lot of fun. I can't think of a boss fight I don't enjoy. And there's some real doozies in this game, but they're all really interesting and engaging. And again, it's so much like playing a Ninja Gaiden game when you get into the boss fights, because it's all about analyzing their patterns and quickly making attacks and moves, rather than like I said, having to really draw out these long encounters. Which is funny I say that, because this boss fight here is kind of a long encounter if you want to make it. And one thing you can do in this game I've noticed is that you can kind of whittle down most of the bosses. But even if you know what you're doing, there's some surprises some of them can get at you. Actually, there is one boss fight, now that I think about it, that I'm not a huge fan of. It's the water stage, and you have to fight this weird, like, jellyfish thing. That boss fight is just obnoxious. That isn't the boss fight I don't like in the game, but the rest are all really good. This one is quite a bit of fun. I can't remember if I re-kill everyone or if I just go ahead and fight the boss. Nope, I do re-kill everyone. Another fun thing, you can fall down on people and kill them Splinter Cell style by jumping down on them. Which I think I did earlier, I don't think I do it again. But enemies like this guy right here, see, I'm not sure why I'm still in low stance. This guy, you see how I'm just attacking him in low stance over and over? I'm using heavy attack, so it does do stamina damage. But really, I think a mid stance would have worked better there. Again, you can just pile drive through those smaller enemies with low stance, no problem. So I was pretty happy to have made it through this stage without dying. So I was really hoping to finish off this boss without any deaths. One thing that I think is a great improvement in this game over Ninja Gaiden, though, as much as I love Ninja Gaiden, is the camera system. The camera system is just much more friendly and usable. An issue you run into in Ninja Gaiden, which isn't a fatal flaw, but it's kind of a nuisance, is how that camera works for you, because it's a little bit more cinematic than it is utilitarian. The camera system zooms in really close and is right directly over you, whereas in Nioh and in Dark Souls they pull the camera back. So in a lot of ways it's less visually exciting, but as far as playing the game, it's definitely more utilitarian, more efficient. You can really see what you're doing better. You're not battling the camera. And it's funny because the lock-on system, it looks exactly like Dark Souls, because that's what you think, but I wonder how much influence Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time had on the Dark Souls style, if you think about it. Because, yeah, the Z targeting, I mean, this is basically Z targeting if you think about it. And I think Z targeting was originated in Ocarina of Time. So as you can see here, the real trick with this boss is simply just whittling him down and knowing when he's going to do these wake-up attacks. Because if he gets you with one of those, it's pretty much curtains. Because he'll not only hit you, but he'll probably stun you and then kill you. And so, another mechanic that I think people might not pick up on are these pools of, I don't know what you call it, it's not water, but these kai pools. They're called yokai realms, I believe. And what they are is, when you're inside them, it drains your stamina. And the way to get rid of them is to do an attack and then kai pulse inside. So with boss fights and stuff, this becomes pretty important to keep an eye on. Because stamina is everything in this game. I'm sure that's not surprising. But once you're low on stamina, you're pretty much dead. And so what can happen a lot is if you get a little too rambunctious with your attack strings and you over attack, and then they just wake up and counterattack and stun you, then you're dead. That happens. You're dead almost every single time. So stamina management's a pretty big part of the game. That got me the first few times I played. Those stupid throws the cannonballs at you. So right here, I'm playing conservatively because I could probably kill him now by activating my spirit animal. I can't remember the term for it, but basically there's a meter. You can't see it because my hand cam covers it, but there's a meter on your health bar. That's your spirit animal meter. And once you activate it, you basically go into hyper mode where you're invincible and you do a shit ton of damage. And I use the fire one every time. You saw I was using it against those red people that I resurrect. So right now, yeah, he's definitely dead if I just activate it. I don't know why I'm being shy about that. I think I literally activated it like right at the end of the fight. I think right here. I was waiting for him to do one of these. There we go. And that's that. So anyway, let me just quickly summarize my thoughts of this video. Basically what I want to get at is, I think Nioh is more nuanced than people realize. Its action combat is extremely well developed, worth getting into, and kind of, I think, my approach to this game is thinking of it more like a 3D action game, like Ninja Gaiden or Bayonetta or Devil May Cry, rather than coming into it like a Dark Souls RPG style game. Which I think they're kind of trying to play both sides there, and that's why it has this kind of hybrid style. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with playing the Dark Souls side of things, but I do think that's why certain players just kind of dismiss it as a bit of a clone, when really there's more going on than just that. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to playing the Dark Souls equivalent to this game. I can't remember, Sekiro or something like that, where it's set in feudal Japan, and from what I've heard, its action combat is much more in depth and much more Nioh-like than your usual Dark Souls games, because I think it'll be fun to do a comparison between those two, so keep an eye out for that. Thanks for watching.
どうぞ。